So you guys got your cheese platters all ready as well?
We just got them out.
Just got them.
We're ready to go.
Hey, Zach, we're pulling it together over here.
Oh, perfect. Thank you guys for joining.
There's a place to push down.
I know there's a trick to it.
Right.
I even gave you this.
I noticed that.
Do that to use on a cracker, but I didn't give any crackers.
How do I get out of this?
All right. So welcome to Wine Stay. My name is Zach. I'm the beer and wine coordinator at Durham Co-op. And my pronouns are he and him. Tonight we've got two wines. One of them is a kind of weirdo wine from North Carolina. We might have the winemaker join us later this evening. Not really sure. He wasn't sure if he could get off work and how all that kind of timing is going to go. We also might have a guest star. My cat Zorro is wanting attention today, so we might see cat head or cat butt at some time tonight. But yeah, so the two wines we have, one is a Pinot Gris Piquette. So basically a Piquette is what the field hands used to drink a long time ago. They would make wine, so they would make Pinot Gris, and then the leftover of the wine, which is basically the pomace, so the seeds and the skins and a little bit of the residual sugars, they would then re-ferment that. They would add some water, re-ferment it, and then get kind of like a second pressing. So if you are familiar with beer making, you can kind of rinse your grains off to get that extra sugar out of it. And it's the same kind of idea with wine when the Piquette style. Now, this is also what's referred to as a pet nat, so pétillant natural, where the wine has a little bit of spritz to it. It's not bubbly necessarily like champagne, so it's much lower like atmospheric pressure, but it still has like a little bit of kind of prickle to it. You can see the color, which is really, really interesting. Pinot Gris is gray Pinot Noir, so similar grape as far as like the family, and you get this really beautiful color. Based because Pinot Gris is a red grape, so they're letting the skins and since it's a Piquette, they're letting that really concentrated skin color really kind of evolve, and it's really fun. It is definitely an interesting profile. The tasting notes, if you will, and Abby was like, I don't know about that one, but like vegetal. So like the way a tomato stem kind of smells. It's got this little bit of tart, kind of sour quality to it, and that wild ferment. So Nick is making wine. He's then putting it into the bottle when he feels like it's just at its peak, capping it with a crown cap, and then kind of letting it do its thing. So the farm is called Stardust Cellars. They do mead as well as still wines and pet nat wines. Most of their wine has a little bit of sparkle. He's like a yeast and enologist guy, and we'll see. Like I said, he might be joining us later, and he can tell you all sorts of kind of nitty gritties. So typically, wine is 12.5%. Since this is a Piquette, it's 4%. So that's why it was drunk by the field hands. So you could drink it with lunch, then go back to work, kind of like bière de garde for the French, or saison for Belgians, where they would just kind of gather all the herbs and spices and throw it together and make a lower ABV, and that's what they would have for lunch, and then go and harvest the grains or whatever it is. It's kind of like the working man's wine, so you can drink this. So if you haven't tried it yet, please cheers. Happy almost Thanksgiving. Let's drink some weirdo natural wine from North Carolina. But you definitely get that. For me, it kind of reminds me of sun-dried tomato. I think it's an awesome flavor profile. And for Thanksgiving, I think that little bit of sparkle and that kind of savory quality could go really well with cranberry sauce, with stuffing, with richer things. And the fact that it's only 4% is quite, much more sessionable than if you're drinking, 13, 14, 15% kind of stuff. But yeah, so the whole point with Stardust Cellars, the folks who are making this wine, they're using traditions from a long time ago. They call it ancestral. And they're also a biodynamic farm. So they're one of the only biodynamic farms in North Carolina. And it's kind of cool that they're paying attention. They're using lunar calendar to make their wines. And they're in it's what's called the Swan Creek AVA. So AVA is an American viticulture area, and kind of like in like Burgundy, which we'll talk about when we get to the Beaujolais Nouveau. The AVAs are like certain areas in America that are designated wine growing areas. So Napa, California, and then there's sub AVAs in Napa or in Washington State or Oregon. And North Carolina has quite a few, and they're adding them all the time. So if you're studying to become like a sommelier or WESET, so the Wine Spirits Education Trust, like those wine education levels, then the sooner you do it, kind of the better, because the later you do, the more AVAs they add. So you kind of have to, keep learning these little, little regions. They added one recently in the Appalachian Mountains. So there's a new region in like Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, Lower Virginia. I think even West Virginia has some of that area too. So it's kind of cool. They, as far as being biodynamic, they use no pesticides or sprays, and they use like wood chips to help with weed growth. They use sheep to mow the fields, if you will, and in between the rows, and to also help fertilize the soil. They do things with clover to add nitrogen, and they're using plants that are ground cover, if you will, to then till back into the soil to give it nutrients. And they pay attention to all of like the little aspects. So they capture all of their gray water and use it for the fields. They compost like 99% of the waste they produce. They use the gray water for their restroom facilities. They they use the lunar calendar to harvest and to plant. So they're focusing on kind of the life cycle of the grapes. Like, yes, when the grapes are ripe and when they're ready to be picked, but in general, they're using like, okay, the full moon is here. Like that means that these grapes should be ready in 2 days. So let's harvest these grapes, and hopefully they're ripe enough, and then they get to make, fun and funky wine. Let's see. So yeah, they're also part of this like RV share. So it's like I think it's called Harvest something. I sent it to Abby the other day. But you can basically, if you own an RV that has a closed system, you can stay at their farm for free and enjoy the sights and wake up, at a vineyard or at a meadery, which they also make, and kind of just hang out. You can order takeout from Wilkesboro. You can, go to the tap house and get a glass or get a, jug of mead so you can enjoy. But yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. So does anybody have any like thoughts on this wine?
Ours is almost quite tart. Is that normal for this kind of wine?
It is, yeah. So it's kind of like the sour beer of the wine world. You don't see a lot of them. There's a few American producers, but it's typically made and it's meant to be consumed. Like, this isn't a wine that you're gonna, throw on your shelf and wait for that special occasion. This is, hey, it's 1:30 on a Wednesday. I feel like a drink, but I still have stuff to do. And
That's
like,
good. Love it.
yeah. And I think like the acidity of this does lend itself to food really well. Again, that's why the farm hands were doing this as a lunchtime beverage. Next time that, did you, Mark and Melanie, did you get the Piquette? Perfect.
You were saying this is analogous to a French wine at lunchtime. Is that true? Do they make a lesser alcohol wine that they drink at lunch during the day?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the whole kind of idea, is also to use the waste up. I know in Burgundy and in Champagne, you have to sell your must. So like the leftover like grape skins and such to distilleries to then distill it into Marc de Bourgogne or Fin de Bourgogne, so that the waste is lessened and you're getting all of the sugars. These people have been making wine for centuries, so they're always looking for ways to use every last drop of a resource that they have, because they're spending their entire lives growing grapes and then making wine. Or and not, some people just grow grapes, some people just make wine, but in general, if you're making something, you want to get the most out of it. Like last week when Kat was talking about the whey production for the cheese, how they feed the whey back to the nanny goats, because it's still really high in nutrients. Instead of just flooding that out into the field or down the drain, they're giving it back to the goats to eat. Chapel Hill Creamery gives their whey to whey-fed pigs. So there's pork that they raise to sell to restaurants. That's what gets to consume the whey, and it's one less thing that you have to kind of figure out how to dispose of, and it still has really great nutritional value. So it's kind of a way just to use up the leftovers, and then it's still interesting for us, and for them, they're just gonna probably not drinking it out of a wine glass, probably pouring it into their favorite mug and just kind of going at it and enjoying themselves.
So is that what they call table wine, or is table wine a notch higher than that?
Oh yeah, table wine is probably 3 notches above this. This is really just a way to use the kind of the leftover wine, if you will, to just kind of make sure that you're using all of the bits and pieces. I do have a picture. So another thing that they do at Stardust is they foot tread. As they mentioned on their website, I Love Lucy, they are literally stomping the grapes with their feet. And then once it's squished all the juice, they're then throwing that into like a basket press, which has so imagine like a whole bunch of like a wooden barrel with slats, but like gaps between all of the slats, and then they kind of gently press the grapes down, and it's really gentle compared to like a pneumatic press, because you're still doing it by hand. Same thing with feet. You're slowly kind of crushing and breaking the skins, but you're not damaging the pips or the seeds of the grapes. So you're able to not get that kind of the bitterness. It's sour, but there's not a lot of bitterness. There's no tannin really to it. It's just much lighter. And even their Pinot Gris does have like their just vintage Pinot Gris, not the Piquette, has the same kind of like rosy color to it, because they're extracting all of the colors that they can from the seeds or from the skins.
Hey, Zach, what is the grapes, and also how'd you come across this?
So the grape is Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio, and I found I've read about Piquette from like just kind of random, like the natural wine scene, that like the information that kind of slowly trickles through my inbox from vendors or from wine enthusiasts or wine spectator or whatever it is. And when I saw one from North Carolina, I was like, okay, like let's see what this is about. I carry several other wines from Stardust too. I carry a Treminette, which is a slightly sweet version. It's not bone dry, but it's not like super sugary like Muscadet tends to be. And we carry a Rosé, which is very nice, like strawberry flavored, nice and dry. Nick makes dry wines. Like he's not making North Carolina Muscadine or Scuppernong. He's making like real vintage wines. So things that are meant to be enjoyed as a table wine, not just kind of guzzled like the Muscadine tends to be. And then he makes one called like Corazon. So his grandmother is from Spain. So he buys fruit from Spain, he freezes it, he gets it in the States, and then he makes wine from it. So like really dense. You honestly, if you were to pour a glass for someone, they would be hard pressed to figure out that, number one, it was made in North Carolina, and number two, that it wasn't kind of full bodied Rioja. So, and I believe the grapes of the red are Tempranillo Grenache. I'm not 100% offhand, but the fact that this is Pinot Grigio is pretty cool. So,
And does other wineries do the Pinot Gris berries here, or the grapes here, or is it something more unique for him?
As far as I know, other people are doing Pinot Gris. I know people are doing Chardonnay. I know that like Raffaldini does quite a few Italian varietals. There's the other ones that we carry. There's a Cab Franc that we have, a Sauvignon Blanc that we have, that the grapes are grown still in North Carolina. The Biltmore Estate is growing Chardonnay to do a Blanc de Blanc. So like their bubbles, they do get quite a few grapes from California and then make the wine here. So it's kind of like, yes, it's North Carolina wine, but it's not North Carolina grown, where most of the stuff that Stardust is producing is grown on their farm. Same thing with the mead. They have like a local apiary to them that they buy the honey from, and then they're canning or bottling, I'm not sure. I know that they're making a Scotch bonnet mead, which apparently is extremely spicy. And then Scotch bonnet being, habanero-esque, really tropical, and then mead being slightly sweet. So it apparently is a very interesting, very intense profile that I think they're going to be packaging up sometime soon. But yeah. Let's see. So as far as like the tech sheet that he sent me about the Piquette is a Word doc, so not the easiest to share today. But like I said, they're doing no spray. If they do have pests, they try to introduce like natural predators. So if you have mites, then they introduce ladybugs. If you have other vermin, then they have the natural predator for that is what they try to focus on. They specifically have birds of prey that they try to entice to nest around their property for vermin and for other birds that would eat the grapes. So that way you've got this kind of the whole biological system is in place, so that this kind of checks this, kind of checks this. They mentioned stirring clockwise to conjure native yeasts. That's part of the biodynamic thing, where Austria is really big into it too, where they bury like cow horns full of things at the end of their vineyards, and they put quartz crystals in different angles. And I don't know. I'm not a biodynamic farmer, so not 100% sure on why that they think these ways, but it seems to work. Let's see. But yeah, so Nick is very like conscious. He talks about his pet nat in a way that he bottling it in like the spring after it's had the winter to settle, after it's had the fall to kind of become wine. So you're harvesting late fall, you're making wine, and then you're letting it rest in the tank or in the bottle, and then hopefully it's clear. Some pet nats that you get are like really, really cloudy and almost kind of chunky with the yeast that's still in there, where his is still like super, super clear and just really, really pretty. But talking about fall wines brings us to our next wine. Look at that. If I had a star fade, I would have used it just then. But this is this year's Beaujolais Nouveau. It's 100% Gamay. I chose the Drouhin family this year because it was affordable and it's consistent. They're a very large property based in Chablis. Joseph Drouhin, so the father of the entire family, in 1880, he was 22 years old, and he's like, I'm gonna start a winery. So he found this property. There's a windmill, or there's a water mill that straddles the river in Chablis, and that's the property that he purchased. And then he slowly kind of moved on and on. His family, so he started in 1880 in, let's see, they've been going for 140 years now. And after he was done making wine, his son Maurice took over, and now his 4 grandkids, Joseph's grandkids, are running the winery. So each one does its own thing. The label this year was developed by Frederique. So she's the one who made the label this year, and every year it's kind of tradition with Beaujolais that it kind of changes from year to year. If you've seen the Duboeuf Beaujolais, then every year it's got a different kind of crazy logo. Drouhin usually does floral kind of patterns. I think last year might have been irises. And Robert, so their father, the 4 kids who are currently running Drouhin, like spent his time acquiring more vineyards and forming more partnerships. So they've got, I think, close to like 400 acres or 500 acres total all over Burgundy. And they also own what's called Domaine Drouhin, which is a Willamette Valley site. And I believe that Francois runs that. So she's making wines in Burgundy style in Willamette, because as we talked with the Bordeaux the first couple of times, it's the same latitude in Willamette as it is in Burgundy. So similar climate, similar growing, features. And if you can grow wine in, grapes in France and have them behave one way, then they should behave similarly depending on the, other little climates that you've got going on in Burgundy. So color-wise, really, really like purpley blue, really purple and pretty color this year.
So this is both in France and in Oregon.
They own properties all over Beaujolais or all over Burgundy in France, and then they also own in Oregon. This is from Beaujolais in France. But 100% Gamay. The grapes were grown and harvested this year. So you're talking like wine that was picked mid-September, magically transformed and jammed into a bottle by the 3rd Thursday of November, and we get it. So you can smell like really kind of big fruity quality to it. When you taste it, definitely has almost, I'm gonna say kind of bubblegummy, but I mean it in a good way. Good acidity still, really, really fine tannins. If just kind of barely coat your tongue, and it's just really lively and fresh. This wine does very well with a chill on it as well. So they actually recommend in the 60s, if not even like upper 50s for this. You can easily drink it at your normal room temp, but the coolness makes it more refreshing. Definitely like nice cranberry kind of flavors. You're also getting some kind of darker notes, which tasty. I don't know. Let's see. So the whole part with Beaujolais, it undergoes what's called carbonic maceration, or carbonic fermentation. So they take the clusters, hand harvested, they throw them into the vat. They don't destem them. They don't like separate the berries, and they let the the fermentation happens anaerobically, so like inside of the individual grapes, versus squishing it into juice, throwing some yeast in there, and then fermenting the juice. It happens on a like much smaller scale, which is why you don't get a lot of tannin. It's why you get that really kind of like, again, kind of bubblegummy or kind of really big fruity expression on the nose. And it's all because of carbonic. And some people in Burgundy in general will still do whole cluster, or if you see whole cluster on a bottle, it's meaning that some carbonic maceration has happened. So if you like that kind of fresh and fruity quality that this has, if you see other wines that have, you know, that those words on it, imagine you should get some of those notes as well. They do a little whole fruit or whole cluster in Willamette as well. They do it up and down in Burgundy, and it's winemaker's choice for whole cluster. And for Beaujolais Nouveau, that's just what they do, because it's a very, very quick fermentation. I mean, you're talking less than 2 months, and it's here from France. This got to the store like the day before Thursday of last week, and you know, under strict French order, you're not allowed to show it or sell it. It's a little more relaxed nowadays, but you know, the whole thing kind of started in the mid 50s, where they would race from Beaujolais to Paris, and whoever got there first would win like a whole bunch of wine. And so it kind of drummed up the excitement of, you know, being first to market and first to Paris. And then they slowly have relaxed the rules, which, you know, it used to be I wasn't allowed to even have the wine in the store until 12:01 a.m. on Thursday, which now, you know, I could have gotten it Tuesday if the trucks had worked out, which being a busy week, it didn't. But yeah, here we are. We're still getting to enjoy some Beaujolais. But go ahead. Sure.
How does 500 acres
in Burgundy compare to other vineyards? Is that huge? Is it small? Is it medium?
So as far as other vineyards, other wineries, or people who own property in Burgundy, it's huge because Burgundy is tiny. As far as wineries in the world, kind of, you know, tiny compared to huge. You know, South America has really big vineyards. California has really big vineyards where people are owning huge swaths of land and making grapes, or, you know, making wine from their property. Or what these folks also do, what's called négociant. So they form partnerships with families and they buy the grapes from them. So like, I don't know if Drouhin has, on the tech sheet, it didn't say if this was part of their like actual estate property or if they're buying fruit. I believe that the bottle that we're drinking is fruit that they've purchased and then made into wine based on, you know, relationships they've had for years and years, versus, you know, the village level, or like the, you know, single vineyard stuff that not necessarily with Beaujolais Nouveau, but with their other Burgundies. They've got property all over and have some really big kind of Grand Cru appellated wineries and wines because they've been doing it for 140 years.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, as far as like the appellations that they have, they've got 90 different appellations in Burgundy alone, plus the stuff they have in the States. So it's they're a larger producer, but because they've got their, you know, they've been able to kind of spread out and really acquire property that you know, not Joseph Drouhin, but his grandson, what he was able to be like, okay, Chablis is awesome, let's buy property there, because people are eventually going to really want these wines because of the acidity, or, you know, just the characters that those wines typically produce. Let's see.
So is Chablis an area of Burgundy?
Yeah, so Chablis, so Burgundy runs from like Dijon down to the you're asking me the hard questions tonight, Len, or my brain's just spacing. Basically, the top of Burgundy to Beaujolais. So it's the Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, Mécanet, Chalonnais, and Beaujolais. So kind of the run, and then it turns kind of into the Rhone. Chablis, so if you've got your map, Chablis is kind of northwest of what we would call Burgundy, and then a little further north and west still, so closer to Paris, is Champagne, and then a little further south of Chablis is Sancerre, so like the kind of the beginning of the Loire Valley wines as they kind of run kind of southwest to the coast, and then underneath all the way at the coast you've got Bordeaux, almost directly under Loire. So I mean, France is not huge. When we think about North Carolina, as far as the land mass, you can get across it in what, 8 hours, 10 hours. Like France is kind of a similar kind of distance as far as the size of things. States are sizes of countries when you think of the US versus Europe. So it's all much more compact. And then because it's just, they've been doing this for a long time, didn't have the destruction that I'm really spacing today. When everybody stopped drinking, why can't I think of that?
Prohibition.
Yeah, Prohibition, there you go. So when Prohibition happened, California really kind of lost a lot of the vineyards because there wasn't any use for them. And, they would sell, here's grape juice, and if you add this package of yeast to it, something might happen. But then you don't have the heritage that has been going on for 400 years, as far as wineries are concerned. And then, back into Roman times and before that, as far as just, turning agricultural product into alcohol to preserve it, because it's, again, a precious material, which then, goes back into the Piquette. So like using every last drop of something to then, get all you can, much like with cat and cheese, much like all of these things, it's more of a born of necessity versus kind of just for fun, which is, we're lucky enough to just have it for fun.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Zach, what chose, there's a lot of Beaujolais, Nouveau. What chose this one for you, for us?
Why
Did you choose
Yeah.
this?
So a couple of reasons. One, I've always been a fan of Drouhin, and their Burgundies and Chablis, and their both white and red Burgundies. They've been making wine for a long time. I have confidence that it's going to be good, even though it's months old, because they kind of know what they're doing, if that makes sense. You also don't see Drouhin everywhere. I could easily pull in DeBoeuf and it would be fine. But there's no, they kind of, for me, they make it to make it, because of the history and the kind of the clout behind the fact that they're just a huge producer. Drouhin was one of the first, if not the first, people to market a Beaujolais Nouveau. So, that still has that kind of tradition behind it. And I think in 1951 they did that. And the other one that we carried last year was the L'Enchant, but with the tariffs, the pricing went from like $15 a bottle to $20 a bottle. And for Beaujolais, like I can sell you real Beaujolais for $16 or $17 a bottle. And so it's kind of hard to, something that you have no idea what you're going to get because it's only a couple months old at this point. It's not really, for me, it wasn't worth the gamble 4 months ago when I bought this wine. So, you almost buy it on a future because you don't know what you're getting. And so we, ordered 4 cases. We'll see what happens. There's kind of no reason to go crazy with it. It's great for Thanksgiving, but it's meant to be consumed between now and the end of the year, kind of. Like it's not really something that you're gonna shelf. You're not gonna put it on your wine rack, kind of like the Piquette. Like you're not trying to save this wine, where you could easily, with their other Gamays and their other Beaujolais that they produce, those are the kind of wines that you really can, enjoy a little longer, because this doesn't have tannin, or at least not very much. So it has a really big acidity. It's, you know, meant for just kind of having fun. You know, America's latched on to the tradition of drinking Beaujolais with Thanksgiving, and it's light and fun. It's, you know, 12%. It's just refreshing, and if you're eating a whole bunch of heavy stuff, then, you know, I think that this is an easy way to go. But that's why, you know, I as far as like the value associated with what you're getting in your glass, as you kind of know from the wine section, I like to go for bang for buck, because it's important. You know, like, I want everybody to drink as much wine as possible. Money is usually a you know, decision in that. So if I can get some awesome stuff for 10 or 15 bucks, then I'm gonna try to. Or some awesome stuff for $3.99 that may be awesome, maybe worth $3.99. You know, it
You
kind
really
of.
enjoyed that $3.99 stuff.
I have enjoyed quite a few myself. You know, it's that kind of, it's kind of a gamble. You know, the people I buy it from, I trust, because it's kind of a blind buy it all situation. Some of them I've had before. Some of them it's, you know, we'll roll the dice, and might be a little past its prime. The wine that we talked about last week, even though it was super brief, I think that's a winner. The Longa Rosso, like that one, I'm happy to sell for 10 bucks, and I think it drinks way past that. And you know, we're always kind of looking for little deals. I was hoping one was going to come through this week, but I think the ball kind of dropped with all of the craziness of Thanksgiving. And our renovation, I don't know if everybody's heard about that or not, starts on Monday. So what is currently the deli is all of that's being curtained off, and it's being turned into a full service meat department and some kind of like takeaway rotisserie chicken ribs, stuff like that. So a lot of things are going to be changing to hopefully better serve everybody, give different price points in the meat department, actually have a butcher who can, you know, make sausages or grind meat, or, you know, do the things that we've been kind of lacking just because we didn't have the space. And with COVID, there's no point to have an open full service bar that you can just go in and scoop. You know, nobody's really doing that right now. So figured that we could use the space as best as we can, and it's something that the community has been asking for. So we'll see. Yeah, it's exciting. We hired a guy named Chris to be the butcher. He's been helping Josh in the cheese section. So if you've been in and seen somebody behind the counter that's not a you know, little British guy, then that's Chris. And he's been all over the country, and he's been being as a butcher, I think, for like 6 or 7 years now, if not longer. And really cool, really excited about meat and meat stuffs. So if you have any questions like that, he's a good resource. He's also a firm believer in spatchcocking, which Melanie and Mark, we talked about today. So like, you know, cutting your bird. Did you do more research on that?
Actually, no, we're gonna do what we have done in the past and do the whole bird.
Yeah, because when we did look into it a little bit, they said it's easier for smaller birds.
Right.
And we've got a 25 plus pounder. We don't have a big enough flat pan that we could flatten a 25 pound bird on. If it was half that size, it would totally work.
Right.
So I look forward to trying it next time. If we're a little more reasonable on our size.
Yeah.
But it'll be fun.
But with the new expansion, or not expansion, but renovation. So you're probably going to have better opportunities to really sell the wines again. You're not going to be able to do the wines day in persona, but you can probably do a lot better pairing and stuff with the meats.
Yeah, that's the hope. You know, we've been doing the virtual wine stays. for about 3 months now. This is our like 7th or 8th. And that's something I get to talk to folks that I used to talk to every week. And that's been a big kind of loss as far as since I've been at the co-op a little longer, just to make sure everything was okay the last couple of days. I've seen some folks that I haven't seen for a few months, like yourselves included. And it's interesting, like the social aspect that has been lost, because it's safer to not be social right now, and so trying to find a way to really re-engage folks. And if we've got a special on ground meat, then we can put some new red wine, or if I don't know if we're doing seafood or not, but if we have some kind of feature, then hopefully we can kind of cross merchandise, and tell people like, hey, this is great for Thanksgiving, or this is great for the Christmas and winter holidays, or whatever folks are doing. I am always available by email. So zach@durham.coop, my awesome little name tag there, that is my email address. So please feel free to reach out to me, Ed and Lynn and I. Then thank you, Sarah. Feel free to reach out, and it's always fun to chat about wine, even it might not be in person. I haven't figured out how to FaceTime people for wine advice yet, but that's why we're doing this. So,
well, hey, I wanted to say that I really appreciated when you showed me the cider signatures, the little green tag. Last time I was looking for some different wines, I was a little bit lost in your selection. So if there's any little added signage of where you put things during your relocation process. Because us, I get fish from Walking Fish every other week, and looking for fish wines and different things. So
yeah, the new labels have been really super. I have enjoyed those too, where it's like earthy and dry, or big bodied red.
Yeah.
Those are
fantastic. So we did that
great.
in the value set just as a test run, because it seemed kind of busy at first, because you got all these different color tags and different words. And now that it's been up there for about a month, or maybe a month and a half, it's kind of calm. Like you walk by, you see it, but it doesn't kind of like glare in your face. And once the dust settles from moving everything around, I plan on doing that for everything in the wine section. And it looks like Nick has just joined us, so I don't know if he can hear us or not yet. Hey, Nick. So Nick is the maker, producer, owner of Stardust Cellars. So if we've hit on some aspects. If people would like to hear from the person who makes it themselves, I think that would be great. If you just want to tell us a little bit about the winery. I touched on some of the biodynamic side of things, which is not necessarily in my direct wheelhouse as far as the bearing stones and stuff like that. But if you want to tell us like your inspiration for making Piquette, I think that would be great.
Certainly. So the Piquette itself is a very ancient tradition, very largely celebrated in France. Piquette is often the wine that's drank while you're working in the fields, out in the vineyards. So what's nice about it is it's a very sustainable product that's made using the recycled grapes after the first pressing of a wine. So after that first pressing presses off a lot of your juices and sugars, you're left with a lot of grape mash, that pomace. So what winemakers do, and generally what the villagers in France would enjoy after this first pressing, is taking all those grape skins, putting it together, and just like you'd be making grappa, re-fermenting on those grape skins. So in order to keep those grape skins submerged so they can properly ferment, I actually take mountain spring water from local spring here in the mountains, the Brushies, and I fill up to the line so it's just barely submerged underwater, and I let that wild fermentation go. So what you get with that Piquette is just a very strong, high skin contact wine that allows for the native yeast and bacteria to utilize the nutrients that are naturally in those skins. So you get a lot more of that dense minerality, a lot more vegetal flavors like cucumber and tomato that you normally wouldn't see in a wine. And of course, the Pinot Gris is a red grape. Normally, when you press it off, you get a white wine out of it because people don't really like the maceration. But you'll find that it's a beautiful vegetal character that's more akin to a Sauvignon Blanc when you actually let it sit on the skins for a little while. And that nice red color is something you don't normally see. Now, my winery specializes in the ancestral method. I don't know if you already went into detail what the ancestral method is.
Just a little bit. We just kind of touched on it, and you know, I shared some information from the tech sheet and about like the whole idea behind Piquette, like using every little bit you have to then, you know, drink while you're still tending the fields. But please feel free to talk about whatever you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, so a large part of Stardust Cellars is reduce, reuse, and recycle, right? So we try and strive to be one of the most sustainable wineries in North Carolina. So the entire facility is designed to be on-field and off-grid facilities. So all of the water that we use goes right back into our fields. So we actually have a small farm, and the vineyard actually is no irrigation, no fertilization, no spray vineyard. So everything is very natural. So these wines actually are using the ancestral method, which I think further solidifies our kind of natural wine tendencies to use the wild yeast and everything that's in these grapes that we get, and the natural wine method that we use helps to bring out these yeasts and make it a centerpiece of the wines. So not only are we re-fermenting on these skins, which kind of gives a whole nother characteristics of these wines, we also kind of bring to light the natural microbial yeast and bacteria that are on these skins. So it's not necessarily a yeast-driven fermentation. A large part of it is lactobacillus and other wild bacteria that are on it. Since I do add water to it, it keeps it from being completely acetobacter, so it's not heavily vinegar. So you actually get a lot more of the lactobacillus and some of the native yeast. So it gives it a really funky and fresh flavor. And what's fun about the ancestral method is you really get to have that effervescence and that carbonation, but it's light, it's funky, it's fresh, it's a little bit sour. The wild fermentation really works well with the Piquette. I think it's really one of the best examples of the ancestral method, because you have just such a higher concentration of nutrients. You're able to get something that you can't normally get with wine. You know, you have the high nitrogen, high vitamins, high minerality, and so you get to kind of play with a different set of yeast and bacteria than you normally would. But yeah, I'm very happy with how this one turned out. I'm really glad you're able to showcase it.
Yeah, how much did you produce?
Yeah, so I only produced 230 gallons of this. So this is based off of around 2,000 gallons worth of Pinot Gris. After pressing, I took all of those grapes and filled just one 230-gallon vessel with it. Filled it up with some of the mountain spring water and let that re-ferment. So it's a very concentrated wine, you know. So you get flavors that you normally wouldn't be able to detect. So yeah, pretty small batch though, given the grand scheme of things.
What is that in terms of cases?
Well, let's see, 230 gallons times 5, about, let's see, about 1,300. That's around just 100 cases or so of wine.
Okay.
Yeah, so pretty small batch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we deal with folks that make, you know, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of cases, and the fact that we have 4 cases of 100 wine, you know, 100 total produced is pretty cool. And one of our people who's joined says that your wine is fantastic. So I also think it's pretty awesome, which is why I wanted to show it off tonight. And thank you for joining us. It's been fun so far. So I did a little bit of background on you because you sent that tech sheet the other day. You studied at Washington State, is that right? Or
yeah,
so
that's right. Washington State in Pullman.
What kind of stuff did you do up there?
Yeah, so in Washington State, my major was in the Department of Food Science. So I wrote my thesis on different wine spoilage bacteria and yeast. So I actually split it up into two big sections. So in one part, I studied Brettanomyces because it was such an important yeast at the time for spoiling wine barrels. So it gets into barrels, and there's not a lot of ways to pull it out. So what I did was I actually studied the minerals and vitamins that were required for its growth, and I found that biotin, one of the key essential vitamins, was required for it to grow. And so then I tried to kind of troubleshoot some different methods of pulling biotin out of wine. And one of the most effective methods I found was actually using a biochemical practice of adding streptavidin. So avidin is actually naturally in egg whites. So the strongest binder of biotin is streptavidin, which is used classically in pharmaceuticals, which is from my background in biotechnology. I kind of figured that out. And avidin, which is naturally in egg whites, is what's more readily available and another strong binder of biotin. So I created a dialysis setup where I actually put egg whites in a dialysis tube and put that into the wine barrels. And that was able to pull the biotin out of the solution, and it prevented Brettanomyces from growing. So it's kind of a neat trick that's really approachable and easy to use. So I did that as part of my thesis work and some publications on that. And then my other publications I did in grad school were around new species of microbes. There was this huge issue in Washington and Oregon with wines tasting kind of like they were dirty, like earthy, but more on like the dirt side, like soil. And no one could figure out what was going on. So I actually took that wine and I was able to extract just a few small like cells that I was able to colonize on a couple plates by passing it through some filters. Like it took about 100 gallons to figure out, like find one cell that I was able to culture. And I cultured it up and I ran some genetic analyses on it. And I was able to find that some soil microbes were actually able to survive in wine. So that was interesting. So I actually discovered 3 different types of bacteria that could survive in wine that had never been found before. So these species had evolved, and I did some tests on them, and I found that they had evolved tolerance to alcohol and to low pH conditions, and to low oxygen, which are 3 things that you'd never expect in soil bacteria. So I actually found that soil bacteria are evolving to grow in wine, which is pretty crazy and a little bit scary. It's to think that there's wine spoilage bacteria that are still evolving, and there's always going to be new threats around the corner for wine. And, I thought that was pretty interesting. But that's my background in Washington. I was in the food science department specializing in wine microbiology at the time.
Yeah, that's super cool. Is that, did the microbes, is that terroir related? Like, were those only found in the vineyards of the winery that you were kind of testing the wine?
I actually found it at quite a few wineries up and down the Pacific Northwest coast. So I actually got samples from all up and down Oregon and Washington coastline. That's the only place I found it. I looked in eastern and south of Oregon, and it wasn't anywhere. So I'm guessing there's some evolved bacteria that are just existing in those subsoils that maybe it's a very different environment between eastern and western Washington and Oregon. And I think it might just be kind of stuck there for now. Of course, that environment is very similar to North Carolina. So I wouldn't be terribly surprised if we start looking at soil microbes here getting into our wine, which is amazing because honestly, it took about 200 gallons worth of wine to find one culturable colony of it. And that was enough to actually change the flavor of wine, just make it start tasting like dirt, which is intense. So yeah, something to look out for in the future.
Nick, it sounds like your background makes you perfectly suited for troubleshooting any issues you find in the future in your own wines. So that's great. I think Mark had a question for you. You ready?
Yeah.
Do you think you can actually replicate it? I mean, from a lot of the times, the wine that you have made, is this something that you feel you have got a sort of a recipe for? Or is it more of a, hey, we made this, it may work again next year?
Well, I can tell you there's never going to be two wines that are ever going to be the same. The same thing with mead, in the way that I make my wine and mead. Using natural yeast and bacteria is always going to be different. Now, the method that I've come up with is I created a way to mimic the seasons, right? So I created 3 different temperature controlled rooms. I start fermentation in the hot, warmer room, move it to a barrel room, move it to the cold room, and then back to the barrel room, back to the hot fermentation room, based on the seasonal changes. So that right there is just one of many ways to control and manipulate wild bacteria and yeast to try and drive a fermentation towards a yeast-driven fermentation. So there's a lot of other methods. If I have my grapes come in at different levels of acidity, at different levels of spoilage, like mold or rot or anything like that, I do change my method to kind of account for that. So I'll actually ferment a little bit colder, like if I have something that comes in with a lot of sour rot or a lot of a little bit funk to begin with. The nice thing about Saccharomyces is a good way to utilize it and prevent a lot of funkiness if it's already coming in funky, is to really force it into a difficult situation where your environment is really inhospitable to most bacteria and most wild yeast. Saccharomyces is the most efficient sugar utilizer. So even in a desperate time, as long as there's the vitamins and minerals it needs to survive, it can actually be advantageous to ferment at colder temperatures that might otherwise prevent bacterial fermentations. And vice versa, if I have very fresh grapes that I want to be funkier, I'll actually ferment it a little bit on the hotter side. I'll introduce a little bit more oxygen. I'll let things that normally don't have a competitive edge over Saccharomyces cerevisiae to have a bit more of a foothold. Sometimes, different sugar concentrations, like if you have a very high concentration of sugar in your must, it gives a huge competitive advantage to Saccharomyces. So if you have a low sugar, you can actually get a much crazier wild fermentation and then blend it. The nice thing about the Piquette, for example, is it's only a 4% alcohol fermentation, which actually causes it to be a probiotic. At 4%, you're not killing off a lot of healthy probiotic bacteria. So you actually get a very different composition of what can grow. And a lot of wild fermentations you see with wine, the only thing that survives at the very end is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. So playing around with the sugar concentrations that you use can give you that as well. So yeah, there's tons of different variables if you really want to get crazy about it. I mean, yeah, pH, the amount of oxygen you stir in. So the amount that you stir, of course, affects as well what composition you get. So there will never be a time in which my wine will taste again the same as it does now. But I promise you, there will always be a way to make it good in a completely different direction. So I'll always keep you on your toes. I can tell you that.
Yeah, that's what when you guys dropped off those first samples to me, that's exactly what I noticed, was like how much winemaking skill actually has gone into the wine, because you could taste that a lot went into it versus just another kind of you made wine in North Carolina, but you're actually making wine in North Carolina, which is pretty cool stuff. And hopefully you can maybe get some of your fellow wineries to kind of join this style of winemaking versus what some of them are doing. But awesome. Well, if anybody has any more questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you again, Nick, for joining us. It looks like Mark, go ahead. You're on deck.
Sorry, as a phycologist, I study algae. I got to know so do you do microscopy? Do you do gram staining? Do you do genetics? How do you identify your bacteria and different microorganisms?
Well, of course, it depends on culturability. So if I'm lucky, I can simply culture it and then just send in a sample. But I have had to use some microbiome analyses a number of times for my, wilder batches of things. I've had the privilege of having a few connections to microbiome sample of places I can send them in. I actually work for RJ Reynolds, which has been pretty fun because I actually do have my own genetic sequencer set up. Um, so I actually have a microseed that I've been using for microbiome analyses for a lot of my wines, and it's been extremely fun to be able to test that out outside of work hours to see what's going on. But generally, you know, with most things that are not completely wild and funky, I can generally predict things using a gram staining technique, you know, pouring a little bit of hydrogen peroxide on it to see if I get some catalase reactions, you know, stuff like that. I mean, I'm pretty well trained in the old techniques, but I've been having a lot of fun ever since we got that microseek from Illumina, seeing what's actually going on that scale. So good question.
That's
Well,
awesome.
yeah, because I've actually got a really cool fungus that we got sent from the Winston-Salem area that was growing below a compost pile. But if I identified it correctly, it's also the same bacteria or same fungus that creates brie. It's sort of a wild little yeast fungus that grew this little white fuzzy stuff over all sorts of vegetation that was sent in to me. So yeah, I'm just very curious about the further identification. Besides I'm a microscopist, so that's my limit. So it's cool you got all those other little traits and tricks that you can use that I can't.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to be able to mess with all those things, and frankly, most of the time I am using you know, the microscopy techniques. I actually have a book that my major advisor in grad school wrote. That's a huge guide to every, you know, common spoilage bacteria and yeast in wine. And so I actually will look at, you know, the colony formation, the different, you know, the different physical attributes of them, and that's probably how I identify most things. But when it comes down to something like a Piquette, where it's just, you know, at that alcohol concentration, it really could come down to just about anything. You kind of have to use that kind of, you know, sequencing approach. But yeah, in general, actually, I'm just taking pictures. I take my phone, I put it up to the microscope, and I take pictures of it, and I kind of analyze it, and I compare to the different images I have in that reference book, which is a lot of fun for me. I really do enjoy it.
Hey, do you mind texting it or putting on the chat what book that is?
Certainly, yeah, absolutely. I can get that set up for you.
Great, appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Yeah, making connections.
That's great, Zach. Thank you.
Thank you both for joining. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Same to you. Same to all of you.
Yeah, our next Wines Day is December 9th from 5:30 to 6:30. We're going to have Matt from Winebow. He's another distributor that I deal with locally. We've got a couple of his wines, the Curator Chenin Blanc from South Africa and the Cune Rioja Crianza are what we're going to be talking about. And then on the 16th of December, so the kind of the mid-month special Wines Day, we've got Sam from Boxcar Handmade Cheese. So much like we did last week with Kat from Prodigal Farms, we've got Sam going to be joining us, talking about why they got into the cheese making biz. And I'm still working out the wines, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be the Garganega from the Small Vineyards Project, which we worked with last year. If some Wines Days we featured it, and I'm not 100% sure what the other wine is, but I got a little bit of time. And then on the 23rd of December, so the last one of the year, Matt from Winebow is going to be joining us again with two wines, a little more holiday themed. So we'll probably have some bubbles of some sort and a fuller bodied red wine. The Winebow book is pretty extensive and has some really cool stuff. But did you get that, Mark, in the text?
We got it.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. If there's any more questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, we will wrap up this version of Wines Day, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks very much.
Thank
And thanks
you.
very much to Mark.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. All of your questions and comments are very much appreciated, and it really helps everybody kind of learn and get everybody's take on things. And it's fun to have a wine conversation in the comfort of our dining rooms or wherever we're at. So, all right. Thanks again, everybody. Have a very happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you next time.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Until next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.